February 26, 1935. A chill wind sweeps across the open fields near Daventry, Northamptonshire, England. Robert Watson Watt huddles inside a cramped Morris van, his breath fogging the small window as he peers at the makeshift equipment crammed onto the bench. The air hums with the low buzz of the shortwave transmitter borrowed from the BBC, its antenna rigged awkwardly on the roof. Beside him, Arnold "Skip" Wilkins adjusts the receiver, his fingers numb from the cold, eyes fixed on the flickering oscilloscope screen. In the distance, the throaty roar of a Handley Page Hayford bomber echoes through the grey sky, climbing to 6,000 feet on its test run. Watson Watt's heart races, not from fear, but from the weight of what this moment could mean. If the calculations hold, those radio waves might just bounce back from the metal beast above, proving that the invisible could reveal the unseen. But in the back of his mind lingers the skepticism of the brass hats in Whitehall, who still cling to their acoustic mirrors and spotter planes like relics from the Great War. The idea had sparked just months earlier, in the dim corridors of the National Physical Laboratory in Teddington. Watson Watt, a Scottish meteorologist turned radio expert, had been tasked by the Air Ministry to explore the fantastical notion of a death ray, a beam of energy that could incinerate enemy aircraft mid-flight. It was the stuff of H.G. Wells' novels, born from the growing dread of aerial bombardment that haunted Europe's capitals. Germany's rearmament under Hitler was no secret. The Luftwaffe was swelling, its bombers like the Heinkel He-111 promising devastation from the skies. Britain's defenses, antiquated. The Royal Air Force's fighters, the nimble Hawker Hurricanes, and the sleek Supermarine Spitfires, still in prototype stages, relied on visual sightings and ground observers. Acoustic mirrors, massive concrete parabolas dotting the southern coast, strained to catch the faint drone of engines, but fog, wind, or distance rendered them useless. Watson Watt dismissed the death ray as impractical. The power required would melt the apparatus itself. Instead, he proposed something subtler, using radio waves to detect aircraft, echoing back like shouts in a canyon. The Tizard Committee, named after its chairman Sir Henry Tizard, had convened in secrecy. This group of scientists and military minds, including A.P. Rowe and the brilliant physicist Patrick Blackett, grappled with the urgency of air defense. Watson Watt's memo, dashed off in haste, outlined the physics: transmit a pulse of radio energy, measure the time for its reflection to return, and you'd have range. Direction could come from angled antennas. It was theoretical, unproven, but the committee saw potential. Funding trickled in £10,000 at first for experiments at Orford Ness, a remote spit of land on the Suffolk coast, but not everyone was convinced. Air Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding, the stern, visionary commander of Fighter Command, quietly supported the work, his Presbyterian resolve seeing it as a divine tool against the gathering storm. Others, like some senior officers in the War Office, scoffed. Radio detection. Sounds like a parlor trick, one brigadier had muttered during a briefing, his mustache twitching in disdain. Give me reliable spotters and anti-aircraft guns any day. As the Hayford bomber thunders overhead, Wilkins calls out the signal's strength. The oscilloscope dances, a blip, faint but unmistakable, as the radio waves rebound off the aircraft's fuselage. Watson Watt's eyes widen, the detection range stretches to 8 miles. It's crude, the equipment jury-rigged with string and sealing wax, but it's real. They repeat the test, the bomber's pilot, Flight Lieutenant R.S. Bluck, oblivious to the history unfolding below. Each pass confirms it. Aircraft could be seen without eyes day or night through cloud or rain. Word races back to London. The Air Ministry, under pressure from Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin's grim warnings that the bomber will always get through, allocates more resources. By summer, the team moves to Bordsea Manor, a sprawling estate on the Suffolk cliffs, transformed into a secret research hub. Towers rise, wooden at first, then steel, transmitting at 2230 MHz, wavelengths long enough to reach far but short enough for precision. Doubt lingers like morning mist. During early trials, false echoes from birds or ships confound the operators. One test in 1936 sees a squadron of Bristol Blenheims vanish into static, prompting a colonel to declare unreliable gadgetry. We'll stick to what we know. Watson Watt pushes on, refining the system. Pulse radar evolves, short bursts of energy, timed echoes calculating distance. Height finding comes via multiple receivers, triangulation plotting altitude. The name RDF, radio direction finding, masks its true purpose, a deliberate misnomer to fool spies. By 1937, the first chain home stations take shape. Massive masts, 350 feet tall, strung along the east coast from Ventnor on the Isle of Wight to Swingate near Dover. Operators, often young women from the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, train in filter rooms, plotting raids on maps with counters and strings. Dowding visits Bordsea, his sharp gaze assessing the screens. "This could change everything," he murmurs to Watson Watt, clapping a hand on his shoulder. But in the officers' messes, whispers persist. What if it fails in fog or under jamming? The Luftwaffe, under Hermann Göring's bombast, boasts its own radar, Freya and Wuersburg, but focuses on offensive might, not defensive webs. Britain's gamble is on integration. Radar linked to sector stations, vectoring fighters like the new Spitfire Mki, its Merlin engine growling at 1,030 horsepower, to intercept before bombers reach London. As 1938 dawns, with Hitler's Anschluss swallowing Austria, the chain grows. Stations at Canewdon, Dunkirk in Kent, names that will echo in war rooms. Watson Watt marries urgency with ingenuity, his team sleeping in shifts amid the clatter of valves and the spark of soldering irons. The world teeters on the brink, and in these quiet fields, the future of Britain's skis is being forged, one skeptical laugh at a time. June 14, 1939. The oak-panelled smoking room of the Royal Air Force Club on Piccadilly, London. Cigarette haze hangs thick under the chandeliers as a group of senior officers leans back in leather armchairs, brandy glasses glinting in the low light. Air Vice Marshal Sir Philip Joubert de la Ferté, a decorated veteran of the Great War and now Director of Signals, swirls his drink and lets out a short, dismissive laugh. "Chain home, Watson Watt's magic towers," he says, voice carrying just enough for the circle to hear. "Give me a squadron of good eyes in gladiators over that electrical nonsense any day." A murmur of agreement ripples through the group, wing commanders in crisp blue tunics, a couple of group captains visiting from Bomber Command, all nodding sagely. One of them, a burly man with a handlebar mustache, taps ash into a crystal tray. "Heard the latest trial at Biggin Hill." The plot faded clean away when a rain squall rolled in. "Bloody thing, can't tell a heinkel from a herring gull half the time." Across the room, unnoticed in the shadows of a corner chair, Air Commodore Keith Park listens without comment. The New Zealander's lean face is unreadable behind the pipe clenched in his teeth, but his dark eyes narrow slightly. Park commands Number 11 Group, the fighter sector that will one day guard London and the southeast. The very approaches the chain home stations are being built to watch. He has seen the Bordsea demonstrations himself, watched the green traces bloom on cathode ray tubes as friendly aircraft flew prescribed patterns. He has spoken quietly with Dowding, who never laughs at the reports coming in from the coast. But here, in this club thick with the scent of tradition and old victories, the new science is still a joke. The laughter is not entirely baseless. The chain home system is still raw. The transmitters at stations like Polling in Sussex and Rye on the Kent coast blast out pulses at 20-30 MHz, powerful enough, 100 kilowatts peak, to be detected hundreds of miles away by anyone with a receiver. German listening posts almost certainly know something is there. The receivers are flooded with noise on stormy nights. Ionospheric reflections create ghost echoes that operators call angels. Height finding is crude, goniometer readings taken by hand, cross-checked between stations, often off by 1,000 feet or more. And the human element is fragile. The WAFs at the filter tables are barely out of school, learning to distinguish real raids from clutter under the stern eye of NCOs who themselves only half believe what the screens are telling them. Yet the network grows. By midsummer 1939, there are 20 chain home stations operational from the Isle of Wight to the Orkneys, their 350-foot transmitter towers and 240-foot receiver masts stark against the skyline like giant crucifixes. The Air Ministry has poured £10 million into the project, an astronomical sum when a Spitfire costs under £10,000. Dowding, now Air Chief Marshal and Commander-in-Chief of Fighter Command, fights continual battles with the Treasury and with his own Bomber Command colleagues who want every penny spent on offensive striking power. Stuffy Dowding, they call him, that behind his back, though never to his face, remains unshaken. In his office at Bentley Priory, the stately home turned headquarters northwest of London, he he pores over the daily calibration reports. He has ordered the construction of the world's first integrated air defense system. Radar feeds teletype directly to the filter room at Priory, where plots are evaluated, then passed to the operations room with its great map table, sector clocks, and tote boards. From there, controllers vector squadrons by radio telephone. It is a chain of trust, steel towers to glowing tubes to young women pushing counters to pilots scrambling in cockpits, all untested in war. In August 1939, the system gets its first accidental trial. On the 16th, a formation of 24 Luftwaffe Dornier Do-17s on a reconnaissance mission skirts Norwegian waters, probing British vigilance. The chain home station at Netherbutton in the Orkneys picks them up at extreme range, over 100 miles. The plot is faint, intermittent, but real. The information filters south through the chain, and for the first time, Dowding watches his system track an unidentified formation in real time. No intercept is ordered, war has not yet begun, but the trace holds long enough to prove the concept. Dowding allows himself a thin smile as he initials the log. But the mockery continues. In September, after war is declared, a senior army officer visiting Fighter Command headquarters remarks loudly in the mess that he'd rather trust the Observer Corps, thousands of civilian volunteers with binoculars on hilltops, than those unreliable sparks. Even some fighter pilots, the young men who will live or die by the system, are skeptical. At RAF Hornchurch in Essex, pilot officer Johnny Kent, a pre-war test pilot with a Canadian drawl, listens to a ground crew sergeant explain the new RDF plots and shrugs. If it gets us up there with a height advantage, fine. But if it sends us chasing seagulls while Jerry slips in low over the waves, I'll take my own eyes, thanks. The Munich crisis of 1938 had bought Britain a year, and that year has been spent in frantic preparation. Spitfire and Hurricane production surges. The Observer Corps is expanded to 30,000 posts, but the chain home gaps remain. Low-altitude coverage is poor. Below 1,000 feet, the radar beams shoot over the top of incoming aircraft. Watt's team races to develop chain home low stations using shorter wavelengths, but they will not be ready for months. Meanwhile, Hermann Göring boasts that the Luftwaffe can deliver a knockout blow in days. His planners study maps of London, Coventry, Birmingham, confident that no defense can stop the bomber stream. As autumn 1939 deepens into the phony war, the chain home stations stand watch through gales and frost, their operators bundled in greatcoats, headphones clamped tight, learning the language of the glowing green lines. False alarms come frequently, fishing fleets, weather fronts, flocks of migrating birds, but each one is a lesson. The system is learning, slowly, painfully, while the old guard still chuckles over brandy in London clubs. And across the channel, in the briefing rooms of Luftflotte 2 and 3, German intelligence officers pore over intercepted signals and aerial photographs of the strange British masts, unsure whether they are navigation aids, propaganda, or something far more dangerous. August 12, 1940, 07:14 hours, chain home station at Ventnor, Isle of Wight. Leading aircraftwoman Daphne Coulthard leans forward in her wooden chair, headphones clamped over her ears, eyes locked on the glowing green trace of the cathode ray tube. The hut smells of hot valves and damp wool. Outside, a warm summer wind rattles the corrugated iron roof. The screen had been quiet for the last hour, just the steady sweep line and the occasional flicker from a fishing boat off the needles. Then, suddenly, the trace thickens. A cluster of echoes blooms at extreme range, bearing 170 degrees, 110 miles out. Daphne's pencil hovers over the plot pad. She checks the calibration, glances at the second receiver for confirmation. The echoes are strong, regular, climbing slowly. Not weather, not birds, aircraft, many aircraft. She presses the transmit key on her microphone. Ventnor Red 1 to filter. Raid 40+, Angels 15, track 350, range 110 and closing. Her voice is calm, drilled into her over months of practice, but her pulse hammers in her throat. Across the room, her section leader, Corporal Elsie Briggs, repeats the call into the direct line to Bentley Priory. Within seconds, the plot is teletyped north. At Bentley Priory, deep in the filter room buried beneath the old mansion, the message arrives on the teletype printer. A WAF filter officer tears off the strip, reads it once, then pins the first wooden counter on the great map table, Raid 40+, south of the Isle of Wight, heading north. The sector clock above the table clicks forward. Other stations chime in: Pevington, Rye, Dunkirk, all confirming the same mass of echoes. The plot strengthens as the range closes. Estimated strength climbs, 80+, then 100+. The filterers confer in clipped voices, cross-checking with the observer core posts along the coast. No friendly formations are scheduled in that sector. This is it. In the operations room below, Air Chief Marshal Dowding stands at the gallery rail, hands clasped behind his back, watching the tote board light up. The red bulbs for Raid 40 flicker on. Beside him, Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, now commanding the crucial No. 11 group, leans over the map. "They're coming straight at the Ventnor station itself," Park says quietly. "Feint or real attack?" Dowding's reply is measured. "Treat it as real until proven otherwise." At airfields across Kent and Sussex, klaxons howl. At Manston, No. 65 Squadron Spitfires are already at readiness. Pilots sprint across the grass in flying boots and Mee Wests. Squadron leader Desmond Cook swings into the cockpit of his Spitfire MKI, canopy slamming down as the Merlin coughs, catches and roars. Ground crew pull chocks away. Within 4 minutes, the entire squadron is airborne, climbing hard toward the sun. Similar scenes play out at Hawkinge, Biggin Hill, Tangmere. Hurricanes of No. 501 Squadron thunder off the runway at Gravesend. Pilot Officer Stefan Wittage in the lead, his Polish accent crackling over the RT as he calls for line astern. The German formation, Eprüfungsgruppe 210, a specialist unit of Messerschmitt Bf-110 fighter bombers escorted by Bf-109s from JG-26, dives out of the sun toward Ventnor. Their target is the forest of masts on St. Boniface Down, the tallest transmitter towers in the chain. Oberleutnant Otto Hinze, leading the attack, knows from intelligence photographs that these towers are important. Destroy them and blind the Tommies. The Bf-110s skim the waves at 50 feet to avoid early detection, then pull up sharply for the bombing run. But they are already too late. The radar has seen them from the moment they crossed the channel. Controllers at No. 11 Group headquarters at Uxbridge vector the interceptors with calm precision. Vector 180, Angels 20, bandits now 80 miles south of you climbing. Cook's Spitfires turn south, throttles wide open, superchargers whining as they gain height. The sky is a brilliant blue, scattered cumulus offering patches of cover. At 20,000 feet, Cook spots them first, sun glinting off canopies, a swarm of twin-engined silhouettes with single-engine escorts above and behind. The Germans never reach their target altitude. Cook calls the tally-ho. His squadron rolls over and dives. Tracers arc across the sky as the Spitfires tear into the Bf-109 escort. Below, the Hurricanes of 501 Squadron bounce the heavier Bf-110s. Cannon shells rip through fuselage and wing. One Bf-110 jettisons its bombs harmlessly into the sea and turns for home trailing smoke. Another explodes in midair, a bright orange bloom against the blue. Hinze's own machine is hit. He fights the controls as his gunner bails out over the water. On the ground at Ventnor, the first bombs fall wide, cratering the cliffs. One stick straddles the transmitter site. A 350-foot steel tower buckles and collapses in a tangle of wire and girders. The station goes off air, but the raid has already been broken. Of the 40-plus attackers, only a handful limp back across the channel. The RAF loses 3 fighters, 2 pilots safe by parachute. In the Ventnor receiver hut, Daphne Coulthard watches the screen clear as the echoes fade south. The plot is gone. She removes her headphones, hands trembling now that the moment has passed. Corporal Briggs lights a cigarette with shaking fingers. "They came for us," she says, "and we saw them coming." Word of the engagement races up the chain. At Bentley Priory that evening, Dowding studies the combat reports. Ventnor is damaged, badly, but the redundant network means other stations simply take up the coverage. The system held. The interceptors were in position with height and sun advantage. The Germans paid dearly for a single tower. In the officers' messes that night, the tone shifts. No more easy laughter about Watson Watt's wizardry. A group captain at Biggin Hill raises his glass to the radar girls. At Hornchurch, Johnny Kent, who shot down a Bf-109 that morning, tells his squadron, Whatever those boffins are doing on the coast, keep doing it. We got the jump on Jerry today because of it. Across the channel, in the debriefing rooms at Ordembert and Kafirs, German pilots report being met by overwhelming numbers of British fighters exactly where they least expected. Intelligence officers begin to suspect that the tall masts are more than mere radio beacons. The laughter, for the first time, begins to fade. August 15, 1940, 11:42 hours, RAF Hawkinge, Kent. Flight Lieutenant Aldeer, a New Zealander with 11 confirmed kills already chalked on his Spitfire's cockpit frame, taxis to dispersal after landing with a shredded tailplane and a glycol leak steaming from his Merlin. Ground crew swarm the aircraft as he climbs down, legs shaking from the 40-minute dogfight. His flight engineer, leading aircraftman Harry Jones, points to the ragged holes along the fuselage. "Jerry's 20mm again, sir. You're lucky the longerons held." Deer nods, pulls off his gloves, and lights a cigarette with fingers still smelling of cordite. "Luck had nothing to do with it, Harry," he says, voice hoarse over the airfield din. "We were up at 25,000 when they crossed the coast at 15. We had the height because the radar girls saw them forming up over Calais an hour ago." Across the airfield, the tannoy crackles with the stand-down order, but no one relaxes. The morning has already seen 3 major raids, Kanalkampf intensified into something far larger. The Luftwaffe is throwing everything south of London today, Stukas, Dorniers, Heinkels, escorted by swarms of Bf-109s. Eagle Day, Goering calls it, the day the Royal Air Force will be swept from the sky. But the sky is still contested, and the cost is climbing. At Bentley Priory, the Great Map Table is a chaos of counters pushed by WAF plotters in steel helmets. Raid 62, Raid 74, Raid 81, numbers stacking faster than the filterers can clear them. Air Vice Marshal Park paces the glassed-in gallery, telephone in one hand, pipe in the other, issuing orders in his clipped Kiwi accent. "Tell 501 and 615 to pancake and refuel, Vector 32 and 74 squadrons to Raid 81 at Angels 18 over Canterbury." Dowding stands motionless beside him, eyes never leaving the board. The system is straining. Some squadrons have flown 4 sorties already, pilots landing with barely enough fuel to circle once. Ammunition is low, oxygen bottles need changing, guns require reharmonizing. But the chain home stations, even with Ventnor still crippled, are feeding a steady stream of plots. Pevensey picks up the low-level raids sneaking in under the beams. Rye and Forness track the high formations stacking over the Pardee Calais. In the filter room, Section Officer Felicity Hanbury, 22 years old and daughter of a Surrey vicar, sifts through conflicting reports. A plot from Dunkirk Station shows a 100+ heading for the Thames estuary. Another from Fairlight suggests a feint pulling fighters north, while a second wave aims for Biggin Hill and Kenley. He cross-references with Observer Corps posts inland, telephone voices calm but urgent. Post Apple 7, large formation of twin-engine plus escorts, course 270, height 18,000. Felicity makes the call, split the raids into 2 distinct groups. Her decision sends number 11 group's remaining squadrons in 2 directions at once, thinning the defense, but covering both threats. It is the kind of judgment the old guard never imagined a young woman making under pressure. Over the Kentish Weald, the sky fills with contrails and black bursts of flak. Squadron leader Peter Townsend, commanding number 85 Squadron's Hurricanes out of Croydon, leads his men into a head-on attack against a staffel of Dornier 17s. The bombers hold tight formation, nose and dorsal gunners pouring fire. Townsend, Hurricane shudders as cannon shells stitch across his wing. He presses the gun button, 8 Brownings hammering in a 2-second burst. A Dornier's port engine erupts in flame. It peels away, crew bailing out over Ashford. Below, townspeople watch the battle from gardens and rooftops, silver specks twisting and diving, parachutes blooming like white flowers, the distant rattle of machine guns carried on the warm air. By late afternoon, the Luftwaffe has launched over 1,000 sorties. The RAF has met most of them. 46 German aircraft are confirmed destroyed. The true number is higher. RAF losses stand at 34 fighters, but only 13 pilots killed, the rest rescued by fishing boats or the Observer Corps network. The margin is narrow, and tomorrow will be worse. That evening, in the dispersal hut at Kenley, pilot officer Geoffrey Wellham, barely 19, face sunburned and eyes red-rimmed, sits on an upturned crate writing a letter home. He pauses, pen hovering. "We got up in time again today," he writes. "I don't know how the people on the ground do it, but they always seem to know where Jerry is before he knows himself. It's like having a sixth sense, only it's made of wires and valves and those tall towers along the coast." He signs it, folds the paper, and tucks it into his tunic pocket. Outside, the ground crew sings softly as they patch bullet holes and refill oxygen tanks under floodlights. At Luftwaffe headquarters in Cap Grisnez, Generalfeldmarschall Albert Kesselring stares at the operations map, face flushed with anger. His chiefs of staff report heavy losses for minimal damage, only a few sector stations lightly hit, no decisive blow to fighter command. Intelligence now confirms the British are using some form of radio detection on a scale never imagined. Reconnaissance photographs of the chain home towers are spread across the table. Kesselring orders intensified attacks on the radar stations themselves, but the distances are long, the escorts short on fuel, and the British fighters always appear in strength at the critical moment. In Berlin, Goering rages over the telephone. "The enemy is directed by some secret means," he bellows. "Find it, destroy it." But the secret is no longer secret. The tall masts have become symbols, targets the Germans must strike, yet cannot strike without paying a price the Luftwaffe is already finding hard to bear. Back in England, as dusk settles over the airfields, the chain home operators settle into the long night watch. The screens glow softly in darkened huts, sweeping the empty channel. For now, the sky is quiet, but every operator knows the echoes will return with the dawn. And when they do, the system, mocked only a year ago, will be ready. August 24, 1940, 15:27 hours, Chain Home Station at Rye, East Sussex. Aircraftwoman Jean Harher wipes condensation from the inside of the receiver hut window and watches black smoke rise from the direction of Manston Airfield, 15 miles away across Romney Marsh. The afternoon raid has just broken off. The sky is streaked with contrails and the drifting parachutes of downed pilots. Her screen is still alive with fading echoes, stragglers limping south toward France. She logs the last plot, then leans back in her chair, exhausted. In the last 10 days, the station has been at action stations almost continuously. The operators work 12-hour shifts, catnapping on camp beds between alerts, sustained by tea and benzedrine tablets issued by the medical officer. Yet the plots keep coming in, accurate to within a mile or two, giving the controllers the precious minutes needed to scramble and climb. At Luftflotte 2 headquarters near Cap Blanknes, Oberst Joseph Schmid, Chief of Intelligence, pins fresh reconnaissance photographs to the wall. The images, taken by a high-flying Ju-86P at 42,000 feet, show the chain home sites clearly, the lattice of transmitter and receiver towers at Pevensey, Fournes, Dunkirk and Rye. Red circles mark the stations already attacked, Ventnor still off air, Polling damaged 2 days ago, Dover lightly hit. Schmid underlines a note in red ink. Despite repeated strikes, British fighter direction remains effective. Interceptions occur with increasing precision. He turns to Generaloberst Hans-Jürgen Stumpf and Kesselring's Chief of Staff. "Gentlemen, we are not blinding them. We are merely annoying them. The system is redundant. Knock out one station and the others cover the gap." The evidence is undeniable. On August 18, during a concentrated assault on Kenley, Biggin Hill and North Weald, German bombers had approached under heavy escort, expecting scattered resistance. Instead, they met coordinated waves of Spitfires and Hurricanes that struck from multiple directions, breaking formations before bombs could be accurately dropped. Losses that day: 71 German aircraft for 27 British fighters. Goering, informed by telephone, had exploded in fury, demanding to know why his supposedly invincible Luftwaffe was being bled white over southern England. Now in the map room at Carenhall, Goering pores over the latest reports under crystal chandeliers. His adjutant, Bernd von Brauchitsch, spreads out lost tables and pilot debriefs. "The fighters are always there, Reichsmarschall," Brauchitsch says carefully, "not in overwhelming numbers everywhere, but exactly where our main thrusts are aimed. It is as if they know our intentions in advance." Goering's face reddens. He slams a fat fist on the table. "Then we will take away their eyes." Concentrate every available bomber on those radio masts. I want them flattened. But the order comes too late to change the pattern already emerging. The radar attacks of mid-August have cost the Luftwaffe dearly for negligible gain. Each raid on a chain home station draws the heaviest possible fighter escort, yet still meets fierce resistance, vectored with uncanny accuracy. The stations are difficult targets, spread out, surrounded by barrage balloons and light anti-aircraft guns, and quickly repaired by Royal Engineer teams working through the night. Ventnor's transmitter tower is already being rebuilt with prefabricated sections. Temporary mobile radars fill the gaps. By the end of August, every damaged station is operational again. Bentley Priory on the evening of August 24, Dowding convenes a small meeting in his office overlooking the lawn where once debutantes danced at summer balls. Park is there, eyes bloodshot from days without proper sleep. Also present are Air Vice Marshal Trafford Lee-Mallory of No. 12 Group and Brand, commander of No. 10 Group in the southwest. Dowding spreads the latest intelligence summary. "Gentlemen," he says quietly, "Jerry has tried to knock out our radar chain and failed. Their losses in the attempt have been severe. We believe they will now shift target." Park nods. "To the sector stations, Kenley, Biggin, Hornchurch, Northolt. If they crater the runways and destroy the operations blocks, they cripple our ability to control the battle even if the radar remains." Dowding taps the map. "Exactly. We must expect heavy attacks inland beginning within days. Reinforce the gun belts around the airfields. Disperse aircraft to satellite fields. And trust the chain to give us the warning we need." The prediction proves accurate within 72 hours. On August 30 and 31, the Luftwaffe launches massive blows against the sector stations of No. 11 Group. Biggin Hill is bombed 6 times in 3 days, the operations room is wrecked, telephone lines severed, hangars ablaze. Kenley takes direct hits on its runways. Yet each time, the warning comes early, 20 to 30 minutes from first detection over the French coast. Squadrons scramble, climb to height, and meet the raiders well forward of the airfields. Damage is heavy, but never decisive. Pilots land on cratered grass strips, refuel from Bowsers hidden in nearby woods, and take off again within minutes. In the underground operations room at Uxbridge on September 1, Winston Churchill himself watches the battle unfold during one of the heaviest days. The tote board fills with red lights, raids of 200 plus, 150 plus, 100 plus streaming across in waves. Park's controllers work with calm urgency, voices steady over the RT. Churchill turns to Dowding and asks the question that will become legend. "What reserves have we?" Dowding's reply is stark. "There are none." Yet the board clears by nightfall. The RAF has lost 39 fighters, the Luftwaffe 56. The cost to fighter command is mounting, experienced squadron leaders irreplaceable, pilots arriving from training schools with fewer than 20 hours on Spitfires or Hurricanes. But the chain home network, battered yet unbroken, continues to provide the margin. Every minute of warning translates into altitude gained, position achieved, surprise delivered. Across the channel, German aircrew morale begins to crack. Veterans of Poland and France speak in low voices in the mess at Ordembert about the verdammte unsichtbare Hand, the damned invisible hand that always places British fighters in the perfect spot. Intelligence officers brief new crews with growing unease. Avoid low-level approaches. Expect interception within 10 minutes of crossing the English coast. Conserve fuel for the return because extended dogfights are suicide. The laughter that once echoed in British officers' clubs has long since died. In its place is grim respect, even awe, for the tall masts along the coast and the young women who sit before glowing screens hour after hour, translating invisible pulses into life or death for the men above. September 7, 1940, 16:18 hours, Chain Home Station at Fairlight near Hastings, East Sussex. Leading aircraftwoman Margaret Rawlins presses her headphones tighter against her ears as the cathode ray tube erupts in a solid wall of green. The sweep line barely has time to clear before the echoes flood back, strong, dense, layered from sea level to 25,000 feet. She has never seen anything like it. The plot builds in seconds, strength 300 plus, then 500 plus, then uncountable. Bearing 30 degrees, range 85 miles and closing fast. Her voice, when she keys the microphone, is steady despite the sudden dryness in her mouth. Fairlight Red 1 to filter. Raid 200 plus, possibly 300 plus. Angels varying 5 to 25. Track 300, now range 80 and closing rapidly. The words ripple up the chain. Pevensey, Rye, Dunkirk, Fournes, all confirming the same monstrous formation stacking over the Pas-de-Calais like a thunderhead. In the filter room at Bentley Priory, the map table becomes a storm of counters. WAF plotters push arrows forward in frantic haste as teletype machines clatter without pause. Section Officer Felicity Hanbury stares at the board, realizing in a cold instant what this means. The Luftwaffe has changed target again. No longer the airfields of Kent and Sussex. This wave is aimed straight at London. At RAF Uxbridge, in the number 11 Group Operations Room 50 feet underground, Air Vice Marshal Keith Parks stands on the raised platform, telephone in hand, watching the tote board fill with red bulbs. Every squadron in his group is already committed or refueling after the morning and early afternoon raids. He issues the order that will define the day. All squadrons scramble. Repeat, all squadrons. Height as fast as you can. Big raid inbound Thames estuary. Controllers' voices crackle over the RT circuits. Vector 030, Buster, Angels 20. Large formations of bandits crossing coast now. Across southern England, airfields erupt. At Duxford in Cambridgeshire, far to the north in number 12 Group, squadron leader Douglas Bader, legs lost in a pre-war crash, now flying with tin prosthetics, leads the 5 squadrons of his controversial Big Wing into the air. Hurricanes and Spitfires claw for height, Merlins screaming. At Northolt, Debden, Hornchurch, Biggin Hill, where runways are still pocked with yesterday's craters, pilots run to their aircraft, ground crew swinging propellers by hand when starters fail in the rush. Flight Lieutenant James Brindley Nicholson, already burned from an earlier sortie, climbs back into his Hurricane despite blistered hands. Over the estuary, the first wave of Heinkel 111s and Dornier 17s crosses the coast at 16:40. There are nearly 400 bombers escorted by over 600 Bf-109s and Bf-110s, the largest single raid of the war so far. The sky darkens with them. Below, on the streets of the East End, air raid sirens wail as people stream toward shelters. The chain home network has given 28 minutes. Warning, enough for every available fighter in southeast England to reach combat altitude. The intercept begins in layers. Forward squadrons from Tangmere and Kenley hit the fighter screen first, tearing holes in the escort. Then the main force from number 11 Group slams into the bombers over Canterbury and Maidstone. Finally, Bader's Big Wing arrives from the north, falling on the rear of the formation like a hammer. The sky over Kent becomes a churning melee, tracers stitching silver lines, aircraft spinning down in flames, parachutes drifting toward hop fields and orchards. Pilot Officer Geoffrey Wellham, now with number 92 Squadron out of Biggin Hill, finds himself in the middle of a staffel of Heinkels. He closes to 200 yards, gun button pressed, watching his 8 Brownings rake the bomber's belly. Fuel tanks erupt. The Heinkel folds and falls. Around him, the air is thick with the smell of glycol and cordite carried into the cockpit on the slipstream. He breaks away, oxygen mask fogged with sweat, and sees London ahead, black plumes already rising from the docks as the first bombs fall. On the ground in Silvertown, dockworker Ernie Childs looks up from the street as the sky fills with the drone of hundreds of engines. He sees the silver specks twisting and diving, hears the distant chatter of machine guns, watches bombers jettison loads early under pressure. The raid is broken before it can saturate the target. Many bombs fall wide into the river or the marshes, though the docks still burn fiercely into the night. By 1830, the survivors turn for home. The Luftwaffe has lost 56 aircraft, Fighter Command 28, but the true cost is strategic. Goering has committed to the terror bombing of London, believing Fighter Command to be on its knees. Intelligence, intercepts, and pilot reports have convinced him that the RAF has only a handful of fighters left. The massive daylight raid is meant to deliver the knockout. Instead, the sky over London has been filled with British fighters, hundreds of them, appearing as if from nowhere. That night in the underground operations room at Uxbridge, Winston Churchill watches the board clear. He turns to Park and asks quietly, "How many more have we?" Park's reply is weary but firm, "We are thinner than we've ever been, Prime Minister, but the system held today. The radar saw them massing across the channel while they were still forming up. We had the time. Churchill nods slowly, cigar clenched tight. Then we shall see what tomorrow brings. In Berlin, Goering receives the first reports with disbelief. Photographs taken by escorting fighters show scores of British Spitfires and Hurricanes over London, far more than his intelligence estimated remained. He orders the campaign intensified, but now at a price he cannot sustain. Daylight raids escorted all the way to the target and back, bleeding the fighter arm dry. In the chain home huts along the coast, the operators work through the night under blackout conditions, screens glowing softly. They know what they have done. The echoes they tracked this afternoon saved London from annihilation. The laughter of 1939 is a distant memory. What was once dismissed as a boffin's toy has become the thin, unbreakable thread holding Britain in the fight. September 15, 1940, 10:57 hours, Chain Home Station at Polling, West Sussex. Aircraftwoman Nora Thompson grips the edge of her plotting table as the first wave of echoes floods the screen. The trace is so dense it merges into a single pulsating mass, hundreds of aircraft already airborne over northern France, stacking in layers from deck level to 28,000 feet. Multiple formations, staggered in time and height, all converging on the Thames estuary. She keys the microphone without hesitation. Polling Red 1 to filter, major raid building. Strength 300 plus, possible 500 or more. Angels 5 to 28. Track 310, now range 95 and closing. Her voice carries the flat calm of exhaustion. She has been on shift since dawn, after only 3 hours sleep following yesterday's battles. At Bentley Priory, the filter room descends into controlled pandemonium. Teletype printers hammer out streams of plots from every station along the chain. Ventnor now partially back on air with a temporary set. Pevensey, Rye, Fairlight, Furness, Swingate, all painting the same picture. The largest aerial armada ever assembled is crossing the channel in 2 great waves, timed 15 minutes apart. The first wave, over 250 Dornier 17s and Heinkel 111s, escorted by 400 Bf 109s. The second wave, already forming behind them, even larger. In the number 11 group operations room at Uxbridge, Keith Park stands motionless at the railing, eyes flicking between the map table and the tote board. Every squadron in his group is already at readiness or airborne from the morning skirmishes. He lifts the telephone to Bentley Priory. Dowding, this is Park. They're coming with everything they've got. London again, and in strength we haven't seen. I'm committing every available aircraft now. Dowding's voice comes back, steady as ever. Do what you must, Keith. We have no reserves beyond your group and 12 groups wing. The chain is giving us 30 minutes. Use it. Across southeast England, the scramble order echoes over Tanner systems. At Biggin Hill, squadron leader Michael Crossley, already an ace with 20 kills, runs to his Spitfire, ground crew pulling the chocks before he is even strapped in. At Kenley, the runways are still scarred from last week's bombing, but Hurricanes of number 253 Squadron roar off the grass verge. At Debden, North Weald, Hornchurch, Tangmere, every field capable of launching fighters empties its dispersals. In the north, Douglas Bader's Duxford Wing, 5 squadrons strong, receives the call and turns south at full throttle. The controllers work with ruthless economy. All 11 group squadrons, Vector 120, Buster, Angels 25, primary bandits crossing coast in 5 minutes, secondary wave 15 minutes behind. Voices overlap on the RT, tally-hos, break left, bandits 11 o'clock high going down. The sky becomes a layered inferno. The first engagements erupt over the Kent coast at 11:25. Number 92 Squadron Spitfires, led by Flight Lieutenant Patterson, dive out of the sun onto the leading Bf 109 Staffeln. Tracers crisscross the blue as Messerschmitts roll and twist, trying to hold their protective umbrella over the bombers. Below them, Hurricanes of number 501 tear into the Dorniers, 8-gun bursts ripping through thinly armored fuselages. Bombers jettison loads into the sea to gain speed, turning early for home. In the second wave, the Heinkels press on toward London under even heavier escort, but the warning has been long enough. Bader's big wing arrives at 28,000 feet over North London just as the bombers reach the suburbs. 5 squadrons, 60 aircraft, roll over in perfect formation and plunge downward. The effect is devastating. Rear gunners barely have time to traverse before Hurricanes and Spitfires flash through the bomber streams at 400 mph. Heinkels stagger, engines streaming flame, crews bailing out over Essex and Hertfordshire. On the ground in Croydon, schoolboy David Crook stands on a rooftop with his father, watching the battle unfold. The sky is a tapestry of contrails, black smoke trails, and tiny flashes of gunfire. He counts 20 parachutes drifting down in 1 minute alone. The drone of hundreds of engines rolls like thunder across the city. Anti-aircraft guns around the docks open up in long, rattling bursts, adding white puffs to the chaos. By 12:30, the first wave is shattered and fleeing south. The second wave, meeting the full weight of fighter command over London itself, breaks apart shortly after. Bombs fall in scattered patterns across the East End, Surrey Docks, and Woolwich, damage severe, fires raging, but nothing like the saturation Goering intended. At 14:00, a third, smaller wave approaches from the east, probing for weakness. It is met by fresh squadrons rotated forward from No. 12 Group and mauled over the estuary. By 15:30, the sky is clearing, only stragglers limping home under pursuit. In the Uxbridge operations room, the tote board gradually empties. Park lowers the telephone at last, face grey with fatigue. The day's tally begins to come in. 56 German aircraft confirmed destroyed, probably 20 more, for the loss of 26 British fighters, 13 pilots safe. The Luftwaffe has thrown over 1,000 sorties and achieved almost nothing beyond scattered fires in London. That evening, in a quiet moment at Bentley Priory, Dowding walks the lawn outside headquarters with Park. The sun sets red over the Middlesex hills. "Today was the turning point, Keith," Dowding says softly. "They came with everything and we were there to meet them. The chain gave us the eyes. Your controllers and pilots did the rest." Park nods, lighting his pipe. "The lads were magnificent, but without those 30 minutes of warning, we'd have been caught on the ground. The radar saved us." Across the channel, at Luftwaffe headquarters, the news arrives in fragments. Kesselring stares at the loss board in silence. 60 aircraft gone, many with experienced crews, in exchange for negligible damage to British fighter strength. Goering, informed at Harrenhal, refuses to believe the figures at first. When confirmation comes, he issues the order that seals the battle's outcome: no more large-scale daylight raids. The focus shifts irrevocably to night bombing. The Blitz begins in earnest that very night, but the daylight battle for air superiority is lost. In the chain home huts, the operators finally stand down as darkness falls. Screens go blank, the sweep lines tracing empty arcs across the channel. The women remove headphones, stretch cramped limbs, and light cigarettes with trembling hands. They have been awake for 36 hours, eyes fixed on glowing tubes that translated invisible pulses into survival. No one speaks of medals or glory. They simply know, in the quiet that follows the storm, that Britain still stands because they saw the enemy coming and told the fighters where to strike. September 16, 1940, 08:30 hours, Bentley Priory, Stanmore, Middlesex. Air Chief Marshal Sir Hugh Dowding stands alone in his office, curtains drawn back to let the pale morning light fall across the desk. On the polished mahogany lies the overnight summary: confirmed German losses for September 15, 56 aircraft, with 23 more assessed as probably destroyed or severely damaged. British losses: 26 fighters, 13 pilots killed or missing. The margins are razor-thin, but the arithmetic is unmistakable. Fighter Command has not merely survived the greatest aerial assault in history, it has inflicted a defeat the Luftwaffe cannot quickly recover from. Dowding picks up the telephone and asks for Keith Park. When the New Zealander comes on the line, his voice is raw from yesterday's endless orders. "Keith," Dowding says, "I've just read the final tally. They threw the kitchen sink at us and we caught it. London still stands. The ports are working. The factories are intact. Tell your people, tell them all, that yesterday was the day we turned the tide." Park's reply is quiet. "I'll tell them, sir, but they already know. The radar girls were calling the plots before the Jerrys had even finished their breakfast coffee across the channel. We had every squadron in the air and at height. Without that warning, it would have been a slaughter." Dowding replaces the receiver and walks to the window. From here, he can see the great lawn where once society balls were held. Now it is dotted with Nissen huts and camouflage netting. In the distance, the autumn mist clings to the trees. He allows himself a rare moment of private reflection. 5 years ago, when he took command of the newly formed Fighter Command, many in the Air Council had considered him too old, too cautious, too religious. They had mocked his insistence on building an integrated defense system around Watt's improbable radio towers. Now those same towers, scarred, patched, but still standing, have given Britain the breathing space it desperately needed. Across southern England, the morning after is strangely quiet. At Biggin Hill, ground crew sweep shattered glass from the dispersals and patch bullet holes in Spitfire wings with doped Irish linen. At Manston, a burned-out Dornier lies across the runway perimeter, its black crosses stark against scorched grass. In the villages of Kent, women from the WWII bring tea and sandwiches to the airfields, chatting with young pilots who look suddenly older than their years. In the East End of London, firemen still damp down smouldering warehouses along the Thames, but the expected second wave never came. The sky today is empty of raiders. At Chain Home Station, Dunkirk in Kent, Daphne Coulthard, whose plot on August 12 first alerted the system to the radar attacks, stands outside the receiver hut during a brief break. The 350-foot transmitter towers rise above her like silent sentinels, guy wires humming faintly in the breeze. A Royal Engineer sergeant is welding a patch on one of the lower lattice sections where a near miss from a 500-pound bomb tore the steel. Daphne lights a cigarette and watches the sparks cascade. The sergeant calls down, "Your magic box still working, miss?" She smiles for the first time in days. "Never stopped, Sergeant, not once." In the afternoon, King George VI arrives unannounced at Uxbridge to visit No. 11 Group headquarters. He descends the 50 steps into the underground operations room, where yesterday the fate of Britain hung in the balance. The map table is cleared now, only a few residual counters left from the morning patrols. The king speaks quietly to the WAF plotters, thanking them by name, asking about their homes and families. When he meets Park, he says simply, "You and your young men have saved this island." Park, ever modest, replies, "It was the whole system, Your Majesty, from the radar stations to the observer corps to the pilots, every link held." That evening, the news breaks across the world. The BBC announces heavy German losses in yesterday's air battles, with only moderate damage to London. In neutral capitals, Stockholm, Lisbon, Washington, diplomats and journalists interpret the reports the same way. The Luftwaffe has failed to gain daylight mastery of the sky. The threatened invasion, Operation Sea Lion, scheduled for mid-September, now looks impossible without air superiority. Hitler, informed at the Berghof, postpones the invasion order indefinitely. In Berlin, Goering convenes a stormy conference at Karenhall. Maps and lost tables cover the long table. Kesselring and Schmid report the bitter truth. Experienced aircrew losses are irreplaceable, fuel reserves are dwindling, and the Bf-109's limited range prevents effective escort beyond London. The Reichsmarschall, face purple with rage, blames his fighter pilots for cowardice, then blames intelligence for underestimating RAF strength. Finally, he issues the order that ends the daylight battle. All major operations will shift to night bombing. The Blitz will continue, but the contest for control of British skies in daylight is over. Back in England, Watt himself visits Bordsey Manor, now a bustling research station developing ever more sophisticated radar sets. He walks the cliffs with A.P. Rowe and Henry Tizard, looking out over the grey North Sea. "They laughed at us in 35, Watt says, voice carrying over the wind, called it a laboratory curiosity. Now the whole defense of the realm rested on it." Tizard nods, "and on the people who operated it. Those young women in the huts, they were the real heroes. Calm as you like, hour after hour, translating blips into survival." As September fades into October, the Chain Home network continues its silent vigil. Night raiders now probe the darkness. Guided by radio beams, the British are learning to bend and jam. New radars, centimetric, airborne, ground-controlled intercept, are already in development, but the foundation laid in those desperate summer weeks of 1940 remains. The tall masts along the coast, once mocked as expensive follies, have become the enduring symbol of Britain's defiance. In the officers' messes, no one laughs at radar anymore. Instead, pilots raise quiet toasts to the boffins and the radar girls. The phrase seen on the screen at Ventnor becomes shorthand for the priceless gift of warning. And in the long nights of the Blitz that follow, when London burns under moonlit skies, the people sheltering in underground stations and Anderson shelters know one thing with certainty. The Luftwaffe tried to come by day with everything it had and was thrown back by fighters that always seemed to know exactly where to strike. The laughter of 1939 is gone forever. In its place stands the quiet, unbreakable confidence of a nation that discovered, in its darkest hour, that science, courage, and integration could turn the invisible into the decisive. October 12, 1940, 06:45 hours, Chain Home Station at Swingate near Dover, Kent. The first pale light of dawn creeps over the white cliffs as Corporal Elsie Briggs steps out of the receiver hut for a breath of cold sea air. The channel lies flat and grey below, empty of the great formations that once darkened it. For nearly a month now, the daylight sky has belonged to the RAF. Occasional reconnaissance aircraft probe at extreme range, picked up instantly by the ever-watchful screens, but the massed bomber streams are gone. At night, the Heinkels and Junkers come singly or in small groups, navigating by Knickerbean beams that British jammers now bend and confuse. The war in the air has changed, and everyone knows why. Elsie lights a cigarette and leans against the sandbagged wall. The station's transmitter towers loom above her, their latticework patched in a dozen places from near misses during August. A faint hum still emanates from the equipment inside, valves glowing, pulses sweeping out across the water and back again, searching for threats that no longer come in daylight. She thinks of the girls on her shift, Daphne, Margaret, Nora, Jean, barely 20, some of them, yet they sat through the longest days of September without flinching, voices steady as they called in raid after raid. The pilots called them angels. The newspapers, when they were finally allowed to print the truth, called the whole system a miracle. In London, the Air Ministry prepares a quiet ceremony at Bawdsey Manor. Robert Watson Watt, knighted only weeks earlier, stands on the cliff path with Henry Tizard and A.P. Rowe as a small plaque is unveiled beside the original research buildings. It reads simply, "Here in 1935-1939, the principles of radar were developed which, integrated into the air defense system of Great Britain, enabled the Royal Air Force to win the Battle of Britain in 1940. No speeches are long, the war goes on. But Watson Watt's eyes mist over as he looks out to sea. He remembers the Daventry experiment, the skepticism, the frantic nights soldering prototypes while the world slid toward catastrophe. They laughed, he says quietly to Rowe, and then they stopped laughing. At Bentley Priory, Dowding clears his desk for the last time as Commander-in-Chief Fighter Command. Political maneuvering and exhaustion have taken their toll. He is to be moved to a less active post. In his final weeks, he drafts a dispatch that will become one of the most famous documents of the war. In it he writes, "The Chain Home radar system, combined with the Royal Observer Corps and a highly efficient control organization, gave us the ability to concentrate our limited fighter strength at the right place and the right time. Without this advantage, the Battle of Britain could not have been won." He signs it with his characteristic precision, knowing history will judge whether he was right. He already knows the answer. In the months that follow, the chain home stations evolve. New chain home low sets, using shorter wavelengths, close the gap that once allowed raiders to slip in beneath the beams. Mobile radar units accompany the army overseas. Centimetric radar, developed in secret at Malvern, begins to appear on night fighters and warships. The technology that saved Britain in 1940 spreads across the empire and to allies, to Malta, to Singapore, to the Western Desert. American officers visit Bawdsey and carry the principles home, where MIT's radiation laboratory scales them into the systems that will protect the United States and guide its own offensives. Yet for those who lived through the summer of 1940, the original chain remains sacred. The tall masts, 350 feet of steel and wire, stand as monuments along the coast long after the war. Some are dismantled in the 1950s as newer radars take their place, but others survive into peacetime, silent witnesses to the days when Britain's survival hung by the thread of radio pulses bouncing back from approaching wings. In the years after victory, the story is told and retold. Pilots like Al Deer, Geoffrey Wellham, and Douglas Bader write their memoirs, each acknowledging the debt. Sailor Malan, the South African ace, says it plainly in a 1945 interview, "We didn't win the Battle of Britain. The radar won it, and we were just the cutting edge." The young women who operated the sets, thousands of them, receive little public recognition at first. Security lingers long after the war. But in time, their contribution emerges, quiet, disciplined, essential. On quiet evenings in the post-war decades, veterans gather in pubs near the old airfields, Biggin Hill, Kenley, Tangmere, and the conversation always turns to those days. Someone raises a glass, to the boffins, another adds, and to the girls on the screens. No one laughs at radar anymore. The phrase, "seen on the chain," becomes shorthand among them for the moment salvation arrived in the form of a green trace on a cathode ray tube. The laughter of 1935 and 1939 is buried deep. In its place stands the knowledge, hard-won, paid for in lives and courage, that a nation dismissed as unprepared, led by men who believed in science when others scoffed, turned an experimental curiosity into the shield that saved freedom. The towers may rust, the huts may crumble, the names may fade, but the lesson endures. In the darkest hour, foresight, integration, and unflinching resolve can turn mockery into miracle. Britain stood because a handful of scientists, engineers, operators, controllers, and pilots refused to accept that the bomber would always get through. They proved, once and for all, that it would not.